everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
Large enterprises are suddenly seeing this matching up, and they're recognizing that they are facing a lot of disruptive forces as they look forward over the next 5 to 10 years. And that has caused a lot of good questions, a lot of my time going around the world talking to people about how do you match that pace of change? How do you change and evolve as an organization at the pace of the market around you, not just what you're comfortable doing?
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Wong, EY's Global Chief Innovation Officer. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Scott. Happy to be here.
So, Jeff, tell us a little bit about your role at EY.
So, as you said, Scott, my title is a Global Chief Innovation Officer. And by that, it means I get to create new things here. So that might be new services or new products that we want to be in, or looking at the services that we've done for a long time in new ways. So as a part of that, we invest internally a significant global fund on internal projects. We also, I own the global labs in artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum, Web3/metaverse, which, Scott, I know is highly related to blockchain, but I have them separate on my books. And also the innovation network internally, which is thousands of people who are tagged to innovation in some way. And it's how we listen to what's going on everywhere in the world.
Well, first of all, I envy your position, and it's a very exciting place to be, and always being at the forefront and experimenting and developing and trying to figure out how you can add additional value to your client base. So that's very exciting. But at the same time, it also, you mentioned the network, which is really interesting because we don't have a monopoly on innovation. So we really have to leverage the crowd, so to speak. And there's literally a scientific body of work around chaos. And the network provides that, kind of intentional chaos where you're listening to different experts talking about different things, even if it's conflicting at some times. Now, we're going to hit some of those big kind of blocks of innovations, but at a big picture, what are you excited about and what are you not so excited about?
Scott, at a really big picture, what I'm excited about is it feels like we're really setting up for this massive burst of creativity, of innovation in the world. And, it's interesting because we're just coming out of a pandemic, right, Scott? So really, we went back through history and we looked at what happens after pandemics, like what happens in terms of society and creativity and really innovation. And what you see after pandemics are these bursts of creativity. So I'll go back a little ways. After the Black Plague, there's a Renaissance. After the flu of 1918, there were the Roaring 20s, right? This amazing time of invention. And so, Scott, what really excites me the most is that I think we're really setting ourselves up as a society, as humanity, to have all these wonderful tools and technologies available to us to really redefine the human existence, and hopefully in a positive way. So when I look at things, I'd say, look at the advances in artificial intelligence over the past decade-ish. And in particular, even over the last 6 months, what's come into sort of the broad consciousness around generative AI, right? And all the advances that are possible there. Think about blockchain and, of course, cryptocurrencies, which has been through its ups and downs. But if you look back, even over the past several years, even in cryptocurrencies, which has seen a better day, at least according to the press, it went from $0 of value to almost $1 trillion of value. Now, it did hit 3+ trillion in the middle, so that's why I think it's getting a lot of the negative views. But if you think anything that you create, any concept that's created $1 trillion of stored value is interesting. And it's interesting about what we can do with that, and we do with that invention as we look forward in the world. And maybe I'll leave it there, but we could get into like what quantum might do and what robotics might be like in the future too.
So it's interesting that you started off with the pandemic. Well, first of all, there are not too many instances. And I remember when the pandemic was happening, and there was some research articles about the fact that we don't have enough experience. And sometimes when we don't have enough instances of experience, our ability to have prediction becomes kind of faulty. But nonetheless, endemics, pandemics, really, I think the way I would characterize those is times of difficulties, times of constraints, times of challenges. And it's amazing how friction and constraints creates and breeds innovation. And then couple that with, I think you're alluding to it, is that the last 20, 30 years, I think where things are converging on the hardware, software, infrastructure, cloud, analytics, data, we're getting to a point that the exponential curve is becoming steeper and steeper, which is a very exciting time. And to your point, it's hard to keep up with even the AI papers that's coming out almost on a weekly basis. So the pace of innovation is happening much, much faster. And for those enterprise clients that you guys work with, it must feel like a blur, like you're looking out of a train that's going at 500 miles an hour.
Yeah, definitely, Sky. It's like they're looking out the window and it looks like they're on those bullet trains, right? As fast as you can possibly go, maybe even a rocket ship. And you're right. I think that what they're recognizing coming out of the pandemic is that with those frictions, their customers realize that they can do things differently, as visibly simply as we can meet over Zoom instead of having to meet in person. But even more so, they realize that they can source their groceries, find ways to listen to music, entertain themselves, all in different ways. And these are changes that people didn't think, oh, these changes are going to be hard. No one's going to really want to do this. And what happened is when forced to, people changed and evolved and survived and thrived and evolved, right? And I think that that's really what has been remarkable about that time. But in terms of disruption, large enterprise, particularly the leading enterprises, are realizing, wait a second, our customers have all now recognized that their mindsets can change, their habits can change, and they're willing to do it. And maybe they can find a better way to do things, better products to buy. On the same side, we talked about the list of technologies that tell us that we can now offer the world something different than could be offered before. So large enterprises are suddenly seeing this matching up, and they're recognizing that they are facing a lot of disruptive forces as they look forward over the next 5 to 10 years. And that has caused a lot of good questions, a lot of my time going around the world, talking to people about how do you match that pace of change? How do you change and evolve as an organization at the pace of the market around you, not just what you're comfortable doing?
Now, I would say the last maybe about 7+ years, robotic process automation has been very big because it was something that was very doable and had a very rapid return on investment for their OKRs. But we're kind of going beyond that. And certainly there's a lot of opportunities for automation, efficiencies, and new capabilities. And even the way that companies, their respective innovation heads are thinking about product development is changing from in-house, external to just really consuming APIs. So tell us about the shift in mindset for some of these enterprises and what are they doing to recalibrate and how is that getting manifested in terms of actual practices and projects?
Well, Scott, I can use us as a great example of that, but we can also talk about different industries as well. RPA is a wonderful set of companies, a wonderful set of tools. We use them quite widely and well. But you're right. We also recognize that in order to continue down the journey at pace and at speed, we needed to evolve beyond that. So there's obviously the normal automations you can build into server-side software that just sort of enhance the processes that you have. We've built a lot of those as well on top of that. But what we're getting to, when we started this about 7 years ago, was recognizing that artificial intelligence has a significant role to play in helping our people be better, faster, stronger, for lack of a better way to term it. So turning our people into superheroes is the way that I talk about it inside here. So when we think about artificial intelligence, we built our own document readers. We call it document intelligence platform, right? So that we process a lot of documents in a year, billions and billions of pages of documents. That's a lot of reading time, right? That's a lot of looking at things time, a lot of looking up, trying to figure out what something is saying time. So we built our own document readers. You can imagine we built AI-driven classification engines, right? Because you can see we have to classify lots of. Is this receipt VAT or non-VAT, right? Is invoice? Should we put it in payables? Where does it go to, right? So we built a lot of metrics around that, and then the most fun stuff we built are some of our prediction engines, right? How do you predict the future using artificial intelligence? We actually got pretty good. We were a top quartile hedge fund in our latest sort of prediction engine, maybe even top decile. But that may be overstepping. I don't want to push that team too hard or too far. So we're able to do all these really interesting things that lead us from, like you said, the concepts of automation, taking tasks away from people, letting people use their brains, to more and more sophisticated types of automation, to looking forward. How do we actually do those models about the future? And I think that that's really what's been a great and wonderful journey for us, frankly, mirrored by a lot of organizations that are out there. Right, the recognition that the basic automations that were available to us, 7-8 years ago, wonderful stuff, immediate impact, straight to the bottom line, but that there's more on top of that. So you're seeing that more happening right now.
I want to take a step back and kind of look at the big picture, which is something that really all of us ask all the time, which is, why is innovation so elusive? So if you look at the big tech, which at one point, many of them were startups, and I'm not going to name them, but every one of them has, skunk projects or labs or, project XYZ, but they all struggle from pouring millions of dollars to billions of dollars. And in some cases, laying off people to completely annihilating labs and projects altogether. Why is innovation so hard? I mean, if it's that hard for big tech, it must be really difficult for everybody else.
Yeah, Scott, what's really interesting is everybody likes the idea of change as far as it's not happening to them. Right. So that's really, I think, the biggest hesitation for why any successful company sometimes struggles to innovate, to create new, to disrupt their current business. And it's because it's uncomfortable. I mean, if you think about, I went to business school, Scott, and so what they teach you is find a widget that's really great and differentiated, then build all the things you can do to protect the production of that widget, right? You might call it patents, but I would call it a lot of processes or product people or legal or all these different counsels that you do to protect that widget, which is the golden goose. The challenge in the world, Scott, is the fact that the world's changing and moving so quickly that what used to be generational shifts, that golden goose, that magic widget that you created, would last you a generation, right? You could have a generation of time before you had to go from widget 1.0 to widget 2.0. The problem with today is you got to do that within 5 years or 10 years, right? The easiest example of this is I have twin daughters who are teenagers, and then I have a younger daughter who's 10 years younger. My twins think, oh, it'd be great. Can you get the latest phone, right? The latest screen, the latest little gadget to go around so they can, text and do all the social media with their friends. My 6-year-old thinks the world is voice controlled, right? She just talks into the air and the world changes around her. Right? The context for that change happened within that 10-year shift. So you can no longer have this luxury of waiting for all that time and thinking, well, the next generation will be able to create the next thing. You have to be able to constantly create. Leading organizations are not set up that way. They're set up in more traditional ways. Find the widget, protect the cash cow, don't disrupt it, be fearful of that change. I would argue that actually there's some tech companies on your mental list there that are actually really trying hard to have that invention and have it be separate. And they're restructuring around that invention being separate and being able to be responsive to that. So I'm hopeful that the global business community starts to recognize that there's a new version of strategy, a new version of how you need to help your companies, your own company grow up. And that includes this idea of constant evolution and constant change.
Now, something that we don't like to talk about is that regulation, legislation. It doesn't matter what the domain could be, but we complain, whether it's FAA or anything else, GDPR, that things lag behind and it doesn't quite catch up to where technology is. And I would make the argument that some of the challenge is people-based, that the people in charge of some of these organizations, very large organizations, are of a certain generation. So even though we talked about the pace of innovation and change, including the human-machine interface and really our etiquette and standard of interacting with machines and tools is changing, the layer of generation is slow, because unless they retire and the next level comes up, the mindset doesn't change as fast. So it's an organizational issue. So how do we overcome some of these roadblocks? And I could think of one automotive company that has exactly this impasse I'm thinking about.
So Scott, you're talking about how people are averse, in the technology world at least, averse to the regulatory environment. Is that?
No. I think what I'm saying is that, again, whether it's pharmaceutical, telco, oil and gas, it doesn't matter. But the people that are at the C-suite, or people that have really the control, executive control, they're perhaps maybe in their 60s or maybe even 70s, perhaps, I'm not sure. And they come from a different background, and their thought and their paradigm is a certain way. So even though they try to recalibrate, they're kind of, it's hard for them to get out of that generation. So unless some of them start to retire and you have the next 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds eventually taking over, it's difficult, right?
Yeah, Scott, I think that you're right. In a lot of C-suites around the world, there is a stronger, more conservative mindset, right? It's oftentimes folks who grew up in that industry or even in that company. And so they've seen the world for 30 years or 40 years a certain way, right? And if you've seen the world and your own success is defined by the way things have always been, you're right. It's sometimes hard to see the need for change. What I am heartened by, though, is that I am seeing more and more of these C-suites and boards start to understand that they have to put different voices in that room, whether that's the next generation of voices or whether that is the technical leads, product leads, people who are trying to invent their future into the decision-making rooms, whether that's the C-suite or councils or committees. It depends on where you are, or even boards. And so you're starting to see organizations, traditional organizations that have been around for a long time, recognize this need. Those, to me, Scott, the ones that are realizing that they have to bridge the current generation of leadership to the next, the current ideas about their industry, their company, and the world to the next generation, and are bringing these voices into C-level positions, perhaps earlier than their pathway would have taken them. I think those are the ones that you're starting to see thrive.
And this is consistent with what I've read about you, which is that you're a big proponent of women in leadership, as well as, those really advocating for STEM education and people with STEM professional background. So if we have time, we're going to come back to that. But let's cover some of the horizontal exponential technologies that are starting to really take shape. Let's first talk about robotics transformation. Tell us what it is and how do we define it, and where are the areas that we should be looking at?
Well, there's two types of robots that I'm really excited about. One is, of course, the AI-driven software, and I call it a robot still. I don't know if everybody does, but I like to call it a robot. If you think about what's possible now, how we're helping people do things faster with sort of the first 10 years of AI, what we're also able to do now is help people with judgment. So I gave a couple examples before about how we're helping people do their jobs faster and better. We're also actually helping our teams have better judgment right? What processes and controls do you need to put into place? Well, if we look at the history of our processes and controls, what's been successful or not, and we learn from that, then we apply it to your particular client. We can now help you with the judgment of what you should be doing for that particular client, right? So we're starting to make those software robots built into the machine not just help you with tasks, but help you with opportunities to consider different factors and different thoughts associated with how you might address a client situation or client problem. Now, when you look forward on that with generative AI, so all the most popular, ChatGPT being the most popular platform right now, because it's the one that was recently publicly released. No platform is perfect, and it's sort of very early, but you can see the potential in it. It was interesting. I was talking to a partner at one of the big time law firms in the area, and they were talking about how they were asking it questions about judgment. What are the 8 biggest arguments you would make for or against this issue? And they were sort of feeding in an issue, right? And they weren't perfect, right? Out of the 8, maybe 5 of them were good, but 3 of them were not really on par. But they're like, wow, we can use this to really help not just accelerate the task, but help us identify and see things that we didn't see before. Human aided. So for me, the software robots, the idea that you can make a robot in your computer a team member for you, a team member on your enterprise team of whatever the project you're working on, that's a really exciting pathway and process. But what you're also seeing, Scott, is this evolution in the physical robots. So those are a lot of fun to play with, especially being an engineer geeky kid at heart. And so you see these different robots are able to do different things. With artificial intelligence, it's a leap step forward in terms of what these robots are capable of. It used to be you'd have to program a lot of sort of static behavior into a robot. See bottle, pick up bottle, move bottle into box. If there's anything wrong with the bottle or wrong with the box, it was hard for it to handle that edge case. You just sit there and have to program everything in. Now with artificial intelligence, it can, particularly computer vision, it can see, oh, the bottle is slightly tilted, the box is slightly damaged, and it can adjust for that using sort of AI as its baseline of understanding. So I think that while it's a little bit earlier, I think you will start to see the idea of physical robots being able to do lots of very interesting things and helping people in not just a manufacturing capacity, but I look forward to seeing it in a home capacity. We see the robot delivery bots here. I live in Silicon Valley, as you know, Scott. So we see the robot delivery bots on the street all the time, right? You can get your boba tea delivered to your door via a robot, right? Instead of having a human having to walk down the street. It's nice. That's just fun, but it's nice to think about what that implies.
Well, I really like the thematic aspect that you're bringing up, which is that it's about aiding. So it helps us to strategize better. It helps us to be better informed, helps us to think through more comprehensively about the different choices in the scenarios. And ultimately, it's about enhancing our work. And to that point, Microsoft, of course, has announced their multi-billion-dollar investment and partnership with OpenAI. And the latest being that their Teams Premium is going to have GPT 3.5 to handle automated generated meeting notes. So it's really happening. But at the same time, there's, in the world that I am in, we see a lot of startups, and a lot of the startups, they tout that they have proprietary AI, but really under the hood, they're just simply consuming APIs from OpenAI's ChatGPT, DALL-E, Stability AI, DeepMind, and hosts of others. So how do we tell the real from the fakes?
Scott, this is really interesting because when I go around and talk to different boards and see whatever titles around the world, too often what I see is people talking about the research. Not just the research, the popular press. They read an article in their favorite newspaper or magazine, and now they're talking as if they've done something with it. The reality is, and I think this too, is you got to get your hands dirty, right? You got to play with it. You got to try to implement it and see what the extent of the capabilities are. And we've seen this not just in AI, but across a multitude of different technology startups that come in. And usually they come in, they say, great, we can do this thing. And this is a crazy large promise. And then you just try to plug it in and you're like, oh, no, well, we need all of your data to train it first. If it's an AI, can you just give us everything you have? And you can see that they're just searching for it. They're trying to match the promise. And I don't begrudge them that. Startups are wonderful and they have to sort of sell it before they have it sometimes. But I think that that's my advice to every enterprise is get your hands dirty. There's great promise. Don't get overly excited. Until you plug it in, play with it, have your teams actually try to implement it. You don't know what the extent of these new technologies can really do for you.
Let's quickly switch over to quantum capabilities and what EY is currently researching and experimenting with.
So we started up a quantum lab team. We're not building a quantum computer, so we're not making that investment. For us and for our clients, what we need to do is understand the implications of where we are in quantum today. The first and most popular, I would call it use case, but I think it's sort of a cybersecurity concern, frankly, is the idea that quantum computers can break current encryption, and that folks are particularly probably government type entities are harvesting data in encrypted form right now with the idea that when quantum hits the right number of qubits, when the algorithm gets good enough, they'll be able to break all of the historical data and communications that are out there. And obviously with folks with sensitive information, not just governments, but large corporates or corporates in general, financial services organizations, that's probably a pretty bad thing to happen. And so one thing we're doing is making sure we're up and abreast on, in particular, quantum cryptography, and making sure that our client base understands what's the state of the art, what are the proposed algorithms for quantum encryption. There are, as you know, Scott, there are a couple of them. Which one should they implement? Why? How to implement it? Those types of concepts, because what I think people are waking up to is that quantum cryptography, the ability of quantum computing to break current encryption, is a pretty devastating disruption for many companies and governments around the world when it happens. The other thing I'll say that's really interesting, Scott, is, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, the promise of quantum computing, just even a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was always like, oh yeah, it's a few decades, right? We're a few decades off. It's okay. You know, they've got some physics problems to solve. If you see some of the momentum around that industry, and you see some of the announcements of the number of qubits, if you see the progress that some of the younger companies are making, what I'm hearing whispers and rumors of is like, we're not talking decades, we're talking within a decade. And then you of course have the more aggressive, I'm not saying they're right, but the more aggressive types who are saying it's within 5 years that they'll be able to break the current encryption. That's pretty, it may or may not be true, but if you're an organization, that's a pretty interesting statement that you need to be paying attention to if you have any confidential data.
Yeah, that's a great point. It really is, and ultimately, these corporations have is a collection of IP and trade secrets. So it's important. To that point, we are definitely seeing progress on the QC hardware side, reaching 1,000 qubits. And pretty soon reaching 10,000, and some are shooting for 1 million, within a few years. But the real issue is, and this goes back to even breaking the cryptography aspect, is that even if you had the hardware power to do so, I wonder if the readiness of the algorithms to actually handle, let's say, 1 million entangled qubits, or the DevSecOps tools, or the validation error tools, or the processes to actually make use of these scalable QCs when it becomes available.
Scott, you're absolutely right. And we see that parallel in many other new technologies. And so I'll draw the parallel to blockchain, right? Blockchain came on the scene several years ago, got this great ride through the cryptocurrency aspects, and then recognizes, oh, wait, in order for large corporates to come on, and sort of the big, what I call the big money to come in, right? Because it's great when you have these very enthusiastic players the early adopters, but in order for it to scale, you need the big money to come on. You need to address things like privacy, security, the cost, of transactional costs, which is somewhat antithetical, I know, to the early adopters, but you need the infrastructure to do that. You need the way to bounce something off of a blockchain ledger into your normal SAP systems, because if you're a big company, you still run off of your normal big enterprise software systems, right? So you need all of that buildup and integration to happen in order for the use cases that people are imagining to become really powerful. And you're right here as well. The algorithms need to catch up. All the tooling around it need to catch up. So we all understand, I think, the promise of it. And this happens with almost every technology, the promise of it. And everyone gets really, really excited and the hype goes really high. But then the hype comes plummeting down when it says, well, you can't deliver it today. And the answer is it's coming. It's just you need to build up these infrastructures and tooling and different aspects. And sometimes the regulatory aspect that needs to build up around it in order for you to get that outcome. But boy, when that outcome comes, it's a different world we're living in, right? And I think that's really what's exciting about quantum over time.
So there's a company based in Silicon Valley. I'm not going to mention its name, but it spent a lot of resources on a new sphere that's still proving itself out. But in the meantime, the CEO has made a big, important announcement to Wall Street that he's cutting costs significantly, and their stock has rebounded significantly. And that's really telling, because at the end of the day, it's about cost cutting and efficiency. So of course, everyone's been reading about how these generative AI is going to have impact to accountants, developers, writers, designers, sales, marketing, customer service, you name it. But what would be the message to Fortune 500 CEOs and your counterpart in innovation when it comes to some of these disruptive technologies and innovation?
Scott, this is great. You know what? It's interesting because what we see is a lot of people invest against the hype curve. A lot of people are talking about it, so I better pile investment in, put more money in, hire big teams. I say that we are going to always invest at the value or the reality curve, right? We do have that luxury. And we started at the beginning we have 250,000 clients around the world, 365,000 people. For us, that is our unique competitive advantage. We can see what customers are really buying, and if it really addresses a problem today. That's always how we've invested. So I'll go back to blockchain as an example. And blockchain early on, it was hitting, this 5-6 years ago, it was hitting the height of its hype curve. All of these things that's going to radically change. And we had put in a relatively modest investment, and for a company of our size, hired up a phenomenal team, super high quality team. It was interesting. The CEO at the time came to us and said, okay, what would you do if I quadrupled your budget? And we sort of looked at, myself and my blockchain, we looked at each other and we said, we take a little bit, but we give most of it back to you, because we needed to see the traction on the ground, right? We saw a lot of pilots. We saw a lot of experiments. But are those pilots translating into real projects? Are they thought experiments that they just want us to come talk to them? Or are they real places where they're going to spend money? And we could see early on the hesitation, skepticism, where the real value could be created. And we knew privacy, security, things were costing too much. And those issues needed to be worked on for CIOs of Fortune 500s to be interested in it. So what I would tell everybody is, hey, you can be as excited as everyone else on the hype curve. And I'm excited about technology. I'm very joyous about all the opportunities about changing the world for the better using these technologies. But when you're putting money to work, put it against the reality curve or the value curve. What value is being really created? Invest that way. And that way you're not disappointed, but you're still involved in following the technology as it grows. So that's how we've done it, and that'd be my advice for others.
That is fantastic. Absolutely spot on advice. And with that, I have been joined by Jeff Wong, EY's Global Chief Innovation Officer. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks, Scott. It was great being here.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.